If you like this video, make sure to visit our Vimeo page and follow us to get the latest update.
So we'll start the session. Okay, so Ganesh and Gansham also there. So in the last session, we started with basically creating info objects. So let me do a quick review of what we discussed in the last session and then proceed with loading the master data today. Okay, so let me connect to the server. So So this is the material master data table in SAP ECC. Okay, now let me log into BW. So go to BW or BW on HANA. This is the same. So once you log into the BW on HANA, so what is the T code? The T code is RSA1, and you have to give a prefix /n or /o. So I'll use /n RSA1. So which are the objects we created in the last session? So this is the info area which we created. So first of all, once you go to the RSA1 screen, under the modeling tab, make sure you are under info objects. Okay, not under the info provider. Go to info objects. We discussed that info objects are of two types, characteristics and key figures. So first we created an info area. Under that we created one more info area, and then we created two catalogs. Okay, one catalog for characteristics and one catalog for key figure. Like you can see here. So as soon as I expand my catalog, I can see the list of objects in this. So like this, you can create as many catalogs as you want. It's basically just to keep the information in an organized manner. Okay, so now how do we create these info objects? So first of all, let's say we started with material group. So we went to the ECC table MERA. So first we need to know what information we are fetching from the source system, right? Which table, what is the data type and length. So now material group, so this is char9. So now we created an info object of char9. So how did we do that? So just simply right click on the catalog, create info object, and then what does it ask? Whenever you try to create an info object, it will ask you for a technical name and a description. So anything you create in SAP, it would require a technical name and a description. So right for now, yesterday we just created info object by giving the data type and length. Okay, and then activate the info object. So here you will find once you go, this is the button, the change or display, and here you can activate the info objects. So now we created the info objects, and then finally, while creating the key info object, right? What is the key info object? If you are extracting data from MEA array, then material number is the primary key. So when you create an info object for this material number, what we have to do? We have to define the attributes. So how did we do that? Now once you give the data type and length in the general tab, you have to go to the attributes tab, and then you have to copy the technical name of the other attributes and paste it here. Control C, Control V. Then when you activate this info object, the system will generate a table that is a master data table. What is the naming convention for the table? The naming convention what SAP uses for the table is /BIC/P, okay, /P, and then your info object name. If your info object name is ABCD, then the table which would master data table would be /BAC/P ABCD. Okay. So what will be the primary key of this table? The info object itself, the material number in info object along with the object version. Okay. So we'll talk about object version when we load the master data. So your material number info object, material number along with the object version will become the primary key of this master data table, and then the other fields will be here. So this way, indirectly, we are creating a table with the help of info objects in BW. Okay, now our task is to extract the data from SAP ECC from MEA array table and update this attribute table. Okay, so that's our next task. Now let me tell you what are the components we have in this. Yeah, so object version, the object version is required to maintain the history of the data. Let's say, for example, currently we loaded a material of type, material type is G. Okay, tomorrow the same material got updated in source system and a new record is updated. So then the system initially it will maintain the both the records before it will update the previous record. It will maintain the history. Okay, so for that we have that object version. Okay, now the next question is would this be a column based table? Yes, most of the tables which are created in BW would be column based tables. Okay, I think if you double click on this and go to utilities, so where is the information? Somewhere we can find whether this is an row store table or it's a column store table. Maybe let me go to technical settings. Okay, so you can see database specific properties. It is by default created as a column store table. So what is row store and what is column store? We'll talk about again when we get into the HANA topics. Okay, but most of the tables which we create in BW would be a column store table. How did we come to this screen? Now if you go to extras, not extras, sorry. So here you have the technical settings, and then here we have database specific properties, and we can see here it's a column store table. Okay. So now our task is to extract the data from the ECC table MEA array and update this attribute table in BW. Okay, why do we need to bring data? Of course, that's how we know, then only we can use it for our reporting, right? So let's say this is my ECC, and let's say this is my BW. Okay, where is the table created? The table is created in the HANA database. Okay, BW is just an application layer. Now this is my SAP ECC. This is our BW on HANA system. Okay, now what do we have here? We have MEA array. Okay, now what do we have here? The P table. Okay, so I call it as P table. What is the name? So /BIC/P ZMATNR. Okay, so that is the table name. So now if you want to extract the data from SAP ECC from SAP system to BW, what we need to do is we need to create something called a data source. Okay, in ECC, in the source system, we have to create something called a data source. It's also called as an extractor. Both means the same, extractor or data source. Now, what is data source? The data source will contain all the logic, okay, which is required to extract data from this table, and what it will also contain the structure of the data what you are extracting, okay. So sometimes we might extract data from more than one table, okay. Then sometimes we want to apply some logic before we just uh, pull the data, okay. So what fields you are extracting? So the structure and the logic of the data what we are extracting will be available in the data source, okay. So we'll see how to create a data source. We'll create this data source in the T code RSO2, okay. These are the T codes. It's not 0, it's O2, okay. So this is a T code where you can create a data source on top of this table. You can create a data source on more than one table. We can create using an ABAP program, etc. We'll talk about them in the coming sessions. For the first 2 to 3 sessions, I'll keep topics very simple so that we follow the terminology and then we follow the navigation. So once we are comfortable with the navigations and you get your access and you do your first hands-on, then I'll introduce all the enhancements or complicated or complex options where you can customize all that. We'll talk about them, okay. So the connection between these two systems would be set up by the basis team. So if you ask Vishal, he would be very familiar with this, okay. So this is the basis is the administration team who manages these SAP systems, okay. So the connection between these two systems would be already established by the basis or by the administrators. Now the first step is to create a data source, okay. The next step what we need to do is we need to replicate this data source to BW, meaning we need to copy that so we need to replicate the data source. Replicate meaning you are copying the structure of the data source. So now BW system should know what is the structure of the data it is extracting, okay. So this replicate data source will be done in the T code RSDS. Now where I am doing this replication in BW, okay, where I am creating the data source in ECC. See, that's why I kept that creating the data source inside the ECC box. Where you are replicating the T code, so you should go to the T code RSDS in BW. So how do you identify which is BW and which is ECC? So every system will have its own system ID, okay. So in the training server, the BW on HANA has a system ID HN1, and the ECC has a system ID EC1. Okay, here you can see if this is not shown, you need to click on this button to see the system ID. Okay. So the next step is to replicate the data source. So when you replicate the data source, what happens is, first of all, the structure would be copied, and when you activate this particular data source in BW, it will create a physical table called PSA. Okay. So a table would be created again for the data source. We'll talk about that, why this table, etc. So a table would be created by the system whenever you activate the data source. So this table is called as PSA. PSA stands for persistent staging area. So if you have worked in other ETL tools, basically you call as a staging area, right? Before you update the data to the final table, you first keep it in the staging area. So this is similar to that. This is a similar concept. Now, so this is the second step. Okay, the third step, first create a data source in ECC on top of this table, then replicate this data source. When you replicate, basically you are copying the structure of the data source. So that's how the BW system know that, okay, this is the data what I'm expecting from the source system. So ECC is called as a source system here because you're extracting data from your ERP. Now, once you activate this particular data source, what will be created? A PSA table would be created. PSA stands for persistent staging area. So this is the final table you want to update the data, but the update to this table happens in two steps. First, the data will come from ECC to PSA table, and from PSA it goes to the target table. Okay, so it's always a two-step process. Why? Because when you're extracting data from a external system, it's always best practice to keep in a temporary table first, and then you update the target table. The reason for this is, see, before you update the target table, that is a P table, you have to do a data validation. You have to check the quality of the data. So you have to ensure that the data what you are loading is consistent. So, and then sometimes you also need to apply some business logic before you load the data into the target table. So when you are already bringing data from a different system, okay, and then you are performing these checks, let's say, take a scenario, you are directly extracting data from the source table and updating here, okay, removing the PSA, okay. If you try to do this kind of extraction, what happens is, first of all, you are extracting from a different system, okay, you are extracting from ECC to BW, so you are passing the data between two separate systems, and then in addition to that, you are validating the data, you are checking the data quality, you are checking the data consistency. So additional logic, programming logic is running, so there is a high probability that this load will fail. Okay, so that's why the best practice is to bring the data from your source table to PSA as is. So when this data transfer happens, the system will not check any data. Whatever the source system is sending, ECC is sending, that data will be loaded into the PSA. Now, from PSA to load the data into the target table, here you can create a transformation rule. What do we create? We'll create a mapping between the PSA table and the target table, and you can write your any business logic there. So you can write a business logic through the SAP ABAP. ABAP is a programming language with ABAP is the programming language with SAP. If it is required, you can write the programming language, apply some business logic, and then finally update the data. The system will. So now, because you are bringing it from the same system, and then you are also validating, that's fine. Okay. So the next step, what we have to do is create a transformation. So what is that we have to create? We have to create a transformation rule. So the transformation rule will connect the PSA table with the target table. Okay. So the next question is, every data source has a separate PSA table. That's right. Okay. So every data source we create in BW will have its own PSA table. Okay. I'll show you where you can check the PSA table name. Okay. Every data source will have its own PSA table. So now the data flow is created. Now the next step is to bring the data to execute the basically. So this data should be extracted every day. See, the data loads to BW will happen every day. At the end of the business day, the extraction jobs will start, which will pull the data for that day into BW. Okay. So to schedule these jobs, basically we have something called info package and DTP. So whenever you run an info package, it will bring the data from through your data source here. Okay. So what does this mean is, so then the next step, the third step is we created a transformation, right? Now to pull the data from ECC to BW, you have to create something called an info package. So info package will bring the data from your source table through your data source into the PSA table. From PSA, the data goes to the target table using a DTP. data transfer process. Okay, so don't get confused with this terminology. So we'll be using these words very frequently in almost every session. So you'll get used to it. Okay, and it's not really complex once you do your couple of assignments. Give me 1 minute. Okay, so the fifth step is to create a DTP and then execute the info package. A background job will be created which will extract the data from source table, and if there is any logic written in the data source, that logic will execute and it will update the PSA table. Then from PSA table, if you want to update the target table, we have to run the DTP. Okay, and if you have written any business logic in the transformation rules, so even that logic will be applied and then the data would be updated in the target table. Okay, so what is the first step? We have to create a data source. Can you tell me where we have to create the data source, in ECC or BW? Quickly, can you all answer me? So the question is, where do we have to create the data source? Okay, yeah, thank you. So that's right, it should be in the ECC system. Okay, now which table is created when you activate the data source in BW? Quickly. Okay, the question is, which table would be created in BW when we activate the data source? So that is the PSA table, that's right. Okay, not the P table. Okay, so PSA is the right answer. Let me tell you what is the difference between P table and PSA table. Okay, so this P table would be created when we activate the info object. Okay, when we activate the info object with attributes, then this P table would be created. When you activate the data source, PSA table would be created. Okay, yeah, thank you. So now let's go to ECC. Okay, so remember these T codes will exist. Okay, these T codes will exist both in ECC and BW. So you have to be very cautious in checking in which system you are doing it. Okay, yeah, Vishal, you have a question?
Yeah, so the number of columns that we have selected in P table has to be same in the data source as well, or I can have like 10 columns created in the data source and out of which I can select just 5 for my P table.
It need not be mandatory that it should have the same columns. Okay, so this transformation rule is important. So which source field is mapped with the target field, so that is defined in the transformation. So even if I have some 20 fields here and if I just have 10 fields, so and you map only those 10 fields, we are good. Okay, the only thing is you are unnecessarily extracting all the additional fields which we don't require. That is the only thing. Okay, so obviously, like as you know, it will occupy your system memory and resources, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, now this PSA table is just a temporary storage. Once the data is loaded to this P table, you can go ahead and delete your PSA data. Okay, not the table, but you can delete the data in the PSA table. I'll show you how to do that. So we'll not immediately delete that, because maybe after we load the data into here, then sometimes we might observe that some data is missing or there is some error. So we always need data in the PSA to be loaded back in the future for any data inconsistency or other issues. So it depends on the data source and how critical is the data. Sometimes you keep it for 3 days, sometimes you keep it for 1 month, sometimes you keep it for 3 months, depending on what data. Okay, we'll again talk about that, how to clear the PSA data. Okay, so for now, understand that once the data is updated into your P table, the data in the PSA table is redundant. Okay, not really required. So now, like I said, these transaction codes will work in both ECC and BW, okay, because sometimes we might need to create a data source in BW as well. I'll tell you when do we need that. So always look on your system ID before you do any operation. Where are you creating? So this MERA, this is an SAP ECC application table. This will not, you will not find it in BW. Okay, so there is no point in creating a data source in BW. So first create a data source on top of this table. So using the T code RSO2. Okay, it's not 0, it's O, RSO2. So I'll give the T code /O RSO2. Now here you can see it will ask you for 3 radio buttons. Now what are we extracting? We are extracting the material master data attributes. So the MEA array is containing the information about the product attributes. Let's say, for example, take a jeans. Let's say that is a product, right? So there would be an associated product number. Then what is the product type? Okay, what is the product brand? What is the product group? Okay, so all that would be the product size, price. All this is your master data attributes. So give some technical name for your data source. Now I'll keep ZMAT_ATTR. I'll follow some naming convention, material_ATTR. Remember, there are already standard data sources given by SAP. Okay, meaning almost every company, there is, this kind of data is very common for reporting, like product information, company information, vendor information, customer information, sales data, delivery data. So this is almost pretty much needed by every company, right? So what SAP did is they have created standard data sources. And so when the ECC is installed, many standard data sources will be already available. Okay, so the first priority should be to use those standard data sources. But as this is our first session, I mean, this is the first time we are creating a data source. So that's why I'm not using the standard data source. Okay, so you should create we call this as a generic data source, what we are creating. Okay, let me keep it here in the slide. So you have the standard data source created by SAP, that is called business content data source. So this is standard data sources created by SAP. Now what we are creating, these are called as generic data sources. Okay, so when we have to create a generic data source, only when the standard data source is not available. Why to unnecessarily create again, right? So now I'll show you how to create a generic data source, but for material, that's a standard. There is a standard extractor given by SAP. Okay, so I'll show you where you can find the extractor, how you can use, what are the advantages of standard extractors. All that we'll talk about them. Okay, right now I am creating a new data source. Choose the second radio button, give the data source technical name, create. Then it will ask you for an application component. Application component is nothing but folder. So just like you have folder for info objects, right? So what is the folder for info objects called? Can you tell me? Quickly, can anyone remember the name? So what is the folder for info objects? That is the first thing we created yesterday, isn't it? Okay, so it's an info area. Okay, so just like info area, which is a folder for your info objects, now the folder for your data sources is called as application component. Okay, so application component is folder for data sources. Now just click on this button. It will show you the list of already available application components. Now go to SAP R3. So based on the type of the system, these application components are there. So under material management. So these are just for organizing your information. Even if you give something incorrect here, if you give a different information, that's not going to throw any error. It's just that you are creating your data source in a different, okay. Then give some description. So now, what is this? Material attributes. Then from which table you are extracting. So I'll give the table name MERA. This is the table from which I'm extracting the data source, extracting the data, right? So now click on save. There are other options. You can use a SAP ABAP program. You can create something called an info set. You can create a database view. All that I will talk about in the next session. Okay. So just give the table name. Now click on save. Okay. Like I said, the first 2 to 3 sessions I will go with the basic options. So that way we get used to the terminology and we are comfortable in creating. So if I start explaining when to use view, when to use info set, then that would be too much of information, and will slightly deviate from the topic. Okay. So what I did, I created a data source on a table MERA. Then click on the save button. Very simple. Give a technical name, application component, description, give the table name from which you want to extract the data. The next thing, it is asking me for an create object directory entry. So whenever you get this window, okay, simply click on the local object. Okay, I'll tell you what is this about. This is mainly required to move your objects to the next environment. So in your landscape, usually we have a development system and then a quality environment and then a production, right? So to move your objects, we basically make use of something called transports in SAP. So all that, how to deal with the transports, we'll have a separate session in detail. So right now, whenever you get this window, just simply click on local object. There would be something called $TMP populated. That means it's a temporary package, and click on the save button. Okay. So don't worry about that now. Click on the local object, and then next to it there is a save button. Just save it. Now in the next screen, it will ask you selection field and hide field. So if you don't want to send some field to them, if you want to hide a particular field to BW, then you can select those fields. Then if you want to filter the data, let's say to BW, to extract the data to BW, I want to keep a flexibility to filter the data based on material number, meaning I want to extract material numbers from 5,000 to 9,000 only. So then I should be able to apply where condition, right? So the fields on which I have enabled the selection, so the where condition would be, the selection fields would be enabled. So on material number, let's say material type, material group. So make sure you give the selection option only on the fields which would be easy to extract the data. So don't keep it on a name. For example, on the names we don't usually extract the data, right? Even if you keep a where condition on the names, the query performance will be very bad. Okay. So mostly on the important fields, just enable the selection fields. Just enable the selection fields. Now save your data source. Very simple. The data source is created successfully. Now you want to test this data source. Okay. You want to verify whether this data source is working or not. Okay. Someone is give me a minute. Someone is asking me a question. Yeah. So we have created a data source in ECC. The next step is to validate that particular data source. The data source which we created is working fine or not. So that you can do the validation or the testing the extractor. You can validate you can check the extractor is working or not in ECC. Okay, in ECC itself. Go to the T code RSA3. What is this RSA3? Extraction extractor checker, meaning it will check it will validate whether your data source is working or not. Let's do that. /o RSA3. So it will do a sample extraction. So give your data source name. What is your data source name? ZMAT_ATTR. Copy the technical name. Control C, Control V. Press enter. So I just want to see some sample 1000 records. So here I have 100 records in each call, and I'm asking to make the system to do 10 such calls, meaning the system will not go ahead and pull all the data at once. If there is a million records in the source table, there is no point in pulling the million records at one time, right? The system will not be capable to handle such huge data volume at one time. So it pulls the data in chunks. So basically, it reads in packages. Okay, so basically it uses a database cursor concept, and first it brings some 10,000, next 10,000, likewise. So in this case, I'm just keeping mentioning that do pull the data 10 times. In each time you pull 100 records. Just we are asking to do a sample 1000 records extraction. So you can see only 3 fields are enabled for the selection. If you want, you can filter the data, material number 1000 to 2000, 3000. Now you can see 1000 records got extracted. Okay, so you want to see those data, you can click on this ALV grid. So data is still not extracted to BW. We are still in ECC. Okay, we are just validating. We are just testing the data source which we created is working or not. That we are checking. Now you can see this is the first data packet, data package 1. So how many data packages would be there? There are total 10 data packages. I want to see the data in 4th package. Okay, so look, this is the material number, these are the fields, etc. Okay, so the data source is working fine. We created a very simple data source, right? Now the next step is we created the data source in ECC. That means basically data source is nothing but SAP has written some lot of code in the backend, SQL code in the backend. In the data source screen, if we give the table name, then the system will automatically generate the code and pull the data from the table. Okay, it's everything is application enabled tool. So now the data source is created. Now the next step is okay, yeah, Vishal, go on.
We selected some fields. I thought that the data source would bring the data only for those fields, but here we are having data for all the fields.
No. The fields which we selected will show here. Okay, what is this? These are to filter the data. Let's say I want to extract only material numbers 1000 to 10,000 to 20,000. I can filter the data based on this. Okay, that fields we selected is not. It doesn't mean that only those fields we are extracting. Okay.
Okay. So in BW, all the fields of that table will come
till PSA. Okay. Yeah, now all fields of this particular table will come into till PSA. Now in the transformation rule, whatever the fields are mapped from PSA to the target table, only that data will be updated. Okay. Now why we are unnecessarily pulling all the 100+ fields to BW when we are not using them, right?
Right, yeah.
So that's where, like I said, there are additional properties which we have to do, which we have to talk about. Then what I'll do is in the next session, I'll create a database view on top of this. Okay. In the database view, I will only select the fields which are required for BW, and then on top of this view, I'll create a data source. Okay.
Right.
So right now, it's a kind of Vishal?
Yeah, got it. Thanks.
Okay. Yeah. So but what you said is correct. It's going to bring all the fields of the table till PSA. Okay. Now let's connect again. Looks like it got disconnected. So these are the selection fields we have enabled. So the data source is created successfully. Now the next step is to copy this data source to BW. Now let's go to BW. So this is still ECC. This is also ECC. So here you can see the system ID HN1. So this is my BW on HANA system. So what is the transaction code? RSDS. Okay, /O RSDS. So you don't need to worry about all these transaction codes. You will get used to them very quickly. Okay, now the next question is, why do we have three columns, only three column selections, right? So when you create the data source, okay, let me go to data source creation part. When you click on the save button, so this is where in this window, can you observe here the selection field I have given only 3. Okay, so that means I am enabling only 3 fields for the data filtering to extract the data. So don't enable all the fields for selection, because let's say someone, if you enable some name field for the selection and someone is trying to pull the data on the name, so if you try to extract the data by characteristic something, by English words, I mean not on the key but the description, the performance will be really bad. Okay, is that clear, Venkat?
Ganesh, what do you mean by hide field? So by default, if you are selecting 3 fields, user won't be seeing the other fields for the filtering, right?
No, not like this. So what does it mean is, so in SQL number between 100 and 2000, between 100 and 2000. Okay, so what does that mean? We are selecting all columns of the table, but for which rows? The rows where the material number lies in between 100 and 2000. Again, so that is where the where condition will be enabled on the material number. Okay, is that clear?
Yeah, I'm fine with the selection one.
So I'll extract the data, then hide. Let's say I don't want particular column. Let's say, for example, I don't want this maintenance status. I'll just simply enable the checkbox. Then that field maintenance status will not be seen in BW. You will see the rest of all the other fields.
Oh, okay, thanks.
Okay. Yeah. Now, so the next question is, but we are bringing all columns to the PSA table. Yes, Venkat, that's what we discussed. So the same question the same question I think Vishal asked, right? So right now I created the data source on top of the table. Okay. So the other way to create a data source is first create a view. If this table is having some 100 fields, now just in the view add only 5 fields which you require in the target table. Then create a data source on the view. Don't create the data source on the table. Okay. Then you will only bring the required fields to PSA. So right now I am doing not an efficient way. The reason is, like I said, first I want to show you the basic options. Then I'll show you how to create a view, and then we can create a data source on top of a view. Okay, is it clear, Venkat? Okay, so now we created a data source. Next step is to replicate the data source to BW, and clearly you can see this is a data source replication. You have to do it in BW, not in ECC. So make sure you change your system. So this is your data source repository, RSDS. So give your data source name, that is ZMAT_ATTR. Then it will ask you source system. Source system is nothing but in which system we have created this data source, ECC. Okay, so there would be a unique ID. Like I said, the basis person, the administrator, would be creating the connection between these two, right? So they will give a unique name for this system. So that is the source system ID. So in this case, the source system ID is T90. Okay, this one T90 client 90. This is just a unique ID given to the ECC system. Okay. Now give the data source name and the source system ID. Go to the menu data source, and here you will find the option replicate data source. So here when you click on the menu data source, you will see an option replicate data source. This is the one. Control Shift F2. Here replicate data source. So what happens when you click on replicate data source? The data source structure would be created in copied to BW. Okay, so it will ask you, do you want to create? Continue. Yes. Yeah. So the RFC connection, that's what I said. So this connection is already established between both the systems. Okay. So creation of the source system and then creating this connection is already enabled by the basis person. So we don't need to do it every time. Now the data, it says data source is replicated. Now go back to your RSA1/N RSA1. Once you go to the T code RSA1, go to source systems. Okay, go to source systems. Under your source systems, select your ECC. Okay, so click on display data source. So that means we are asking to show me the data sources of the source system C90 client 90. So looks like the system is a bit slow. Okay, now give me 1 minute. Now search for your data source. What is our data source name? ZMAT underscore ATTR. Here is the search button. ZMAT underscore ATTR. Okay, so I don't know, for some reason might be my internet is slow, or the server is slow. It's taking some time. So the next step, what we have to do is, now we replicated the data source, we have to activate that data source. When you activate the data source, the system will run some background program and it will create a table. That table is called as PSA. PSA stands for persistent staging area, with the same structure as your data source. Okay. Hello, can you call me? Oh, sorry, can you hear me? Can anyone hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So seems to be my network got disconnected for quickly. Okay, we'll do one thing. We'll take a quick break for 10 minutes. So it's 6:40 for me. We'll be back by 6:50 p.m. PST. Okay, so 10 minutes. Okay, then again we'll continue. Okay, is that fine? Okay, so shall we start the session? Ganesh, Ghanshyam, Venkat, Vishal. Okay, yeah, thank you. So let me start sharing my screen. Let me know if you are able to see. So what we did so far is we created a data source in ECC. Now we replicated that particular data source to BW. Okay, the next step we have to do is we have to activate this particular data source. Okay, now let me log in again to the system. So let me log in. So go to the T code RSA1. Now what I want to do is I want to replicate this particular data source. Sorry, we replicated, I want to activate. So go to source systems, and then when you select the source system, it will show you the application components. Now search for your data source. Our data source is ZMAT_ATTR. Okay. Now this is the data source, and next to the data source you can see there is a not equal to symbol, and then this icon is grayed out. If you compare with this is in green color, whereas all these are in gray color, right? And there is a not equal to symbol, meaning this data source is currently inactive. Okay, so go to change mode. Okay, now here once you get into the change mode of your data source, now we have to activate this particular data source. Okay, so here we have the activation button. Now click on activate. Now once we click on activate, the system runs a program, and then it will create a PSA table. So PSA stands for persistent staging area. So I'll show you how you can see the PSA table name. So now the data source is active and executable. You can see a green color icon. So here next to the activate button, there is something called technical attributes. Okay, so click on technical attributes. Now here you see PSA table, right? So this is the table name, which is, there is no certain naming convention for this. The system will randomly start with this names. Okay, it will start with /BSc/B00, and then it will randomly assign some number. So this is the PSA table. So the PSA table will have the fields which the data source is bringing. Okay, now the next step is to create a transformation. So we need to this data source, I mean the PSA table, with your final target table, the attribute table. So that would be done through a transformation rule. Now what for this transformation rule, the source is PSA, that is the data source. The target is the info object attributes. Now let's see how to create a transformation. Go back, select your data source, okay, right click, and then create transformation. Select your data source, right click, and say create transformation. So the source of the transformation is data source, and then the target of the transformation is info object attributes. What is the info object? ZATNR. Okay. Now when you give the attributes, it will automatically connect to the P table. Okay. So before we create a transformation, so I forgot one step. What we have to do is we have to add this info object in the info provider screen. Okay. So info provider is nothing but on which you do your reporting. So all the info objects which are used in the reporting has to be added in the info provider screen. So now in the info provider, this our info area, right click and say insert characteristic as info provider. The info object which we are loading the master data, so that info object has to be added here. Then it has both attributes and text. Select the attributes, right click, and then say create transformation. Now the source of the transformation. The source of the transformation is data source. What is the data source? ZMAT underscore ATTR. In which source system? T90. So you can select the data source, source system, T90 client 90. This one. So this is your data source. This is the target info object. Now click on continue. So this is where we do the mapping between your PSA table and the target table, that is our P table. Okay. So what you see on the, if you scroll down, so what you see on the right hand side is our master data table or the P table, and what is on the left hand side is our attribute table. So there are a lot of additional fields we brought, right? So that basically we'll see how to create the optimal way of designing this data source in the next session. Okay. So now do the mapping, material number, then industry sector, just do a drag and drop, then material group, maintenance status, so this is the transformation. So only the fields which are mapped will be loaded with data. Then material type, okay. So what is the question? Does the P table already exist with columns? So if you remember, when we create the info object material number, we added attributes, right? So first we created 5 info objects, and then we created the key info object. When we are creating the key info object, we added those 5 info objects as attributes of material. So that's why the P table will already have these columns. Okay. So let me redo the mapping. Okay, what is the question? Okay, yeah. So it looks like there's some problem with my internet connection today. Give me a minute. Okay, let me reconnect. Any questions meanwhile? So far, are you clear with what we are doing so far? So this is what we are creating, the transformation. Transformation is right now you can assume the transformation is nothing but the mapping between the source fields and the target fields, but you can do a lot of additional logic within the transformation. Okay. Okay, looks like the server is not getting connected. Okay, so that's fine. Now maybe anyways, I don't want to cover too much today. So once the transformation is created, then the next thing what we have to do is we have to create an info package and a DTP. Okay. So info package will extract data from your source table till PSA. From PSA, data would be loaded to the target table using a DTP. So these are the 2 steps which we have to do. Now the assignment is just continuation to what we have you were doing in the previous session. Okay. Now that you created a info objects for KNA1, create data source, transformation for the above 3. Okay. So this is your next assignment. Okay. So I'm just keeping the session short because I don't know whether you got your access and then you are started your exercises or not. But I would say you have to get the access to the recordings, access to the materials, and access to the server before next session. Otherwise, there is no point in even attending the session. So I'll talk to the training coordinator. I'll make sure you get your access before the next session. If there is a delay in the server access, then I'll not even take the next session, because that would be a lot of hands-on completely. Now going forward, it will be completely hands-on, and if you miss the next session, then it would be very tough to follow the 4th session. Okay, so it is very important that you complete these assignments before we come for the next session. So because next session would be more of completely how do we load the data, what kind of issues we get while loading, okay, how do we fix it, what is the best way to reload the data when there is an error, okay, what happens if I reload the same data again. So all these things we are going to discuss. So you will only follow those topics when you do these assignments. Okay, so please make sure you get your access, you get access to the materials, okay, recordings. Go through these 2 sessions for sure before you attend the next session, because like, although it looked very simple while I'm showing, I'm sure, when you do it, you will struggle because it's not easy, right? Where to click, where to drag, even that simple mapping sometimes, when you're doing it for the first time, it will not be easy. Okay, so that's why please make sure, you get your access and complete these assignments. Okay. So any questions for today? And from next week we'll have 2.5 hours to 3 hour session per day. So per week we'll cover 6 hours or 5.5 hours to 6 hours closely. So any questions for today? Yeah, this is only a weekend class. Yes, let me unmute everyone. Yes, Vishal. Somehow I'm not able to unmute you.
Yeah.
Can you check from your end?
Yeah.
Yeah, Vishal, can you unmute yourself?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, tell me. I can hear you now.
Okay. So
Yes.
I was able to follow the process, but I was a bit lost between.
Oh, you are again muted.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm a bit lost between the info provider
Hello?
screen and the transformation.
No, I didn't mute you.
Okay. Can you hear me now? Hello?
Yeah.
You can hear me? Hello,
Ganesh?
Hello?
Okay. So, yeah. No worries. What I'll do is, I can hear you. So, what I'm saying is, uh, yeah, I can hear you, Vishal.
Ganesh? Hello? Hello?
Okay, Vishal. So what I'm saying is, yeah, I understood your question. I mean, I understand what you said, that you lost when we are discussing about the info provider and then the transmission. So that's okay. We'll talk about that once again in the next session. So we will start from the transformation screen once again, and then we'll do the data load, and then we'll also do one more scenario. Okay. So that's why my intention for today to keep the session short is for the same, because unless you start navigating these screens, it will not be easy to follow everything. Okay. Fine. So please, get your access part done before the next session. Okay. So talk to your training coordinator to get access to the server and also to the blog. Okay. So thanks everyone. We'll meet in the next session. Bye.
Thank you for attending the session. I hope you all enjoyed it. Don't forget to visit our Vimeo page and follow for more upcoming videos.